You mean to tell me that this whole time you guys are fawning over a book about domestic violence?
I will never be reading a Colleen Hoover ever again, because the way that she wrote these assaults happening romanticizes them and portrays them as sexy and romantic, but it's just straight up.
I hated this book. It was one of the worst things that I read in 2022. Colleen Hoover romanticizes abuse.
People who take some issue with it and say that it's romanticizing abuse.
That's storytelling to me, so I don't really know.
I've noticed that whenever people discuss Colleen Hoover, there's usually a passionate group of fans singing her praises and another group pointing out serious issues in her work. If you haven't heard of her, she's the author of best-selling novels like It Ends With Us, which got a massive push on social media. However, beneath that popularity, there's a ton of controversy ranging from her portrayals of romantic relationships to odd merchandise decisions to legal battles with Hollywood players. In this video, I want to break down what's been going on and why so many people are fired up about Hoover and her books, especially the way she writes about domestic violence and problematic relationships.
This comment unfortunately proves my point exactly, that authors are using sexual assault as a plot device without consequence, and that readers are just glossing over it and accepting it as normal. I haven't finished the book yet, but there's already been 2 instances where Verity assaults Jeremy. In Verity's manuscript chapter, she admits to waking Jeremy up with sex, and that is assault because Jeremy was asleep and could not consent. Had Jeremy previously stated in the book that he was okay with this happening to him, it wouldn't be as big of an issue as it is, but he never says that he's okay with this. And the reason that I say that it's been glossed over in the book is because Lowen is supposed to be a morally correct character, and as she's reading these manuscripts, it doesn't faze her that Jeremy gets assaulted. Instead, she gets jealous of his sex life. Despite enjoying the rest of this book, I will never be reading a Colleen Hoover ever again, because the way that she wrote these assaults happening romanticizes them and portrays them as sexy and romantic, but it's just straight up. And that's it.
IT all started with Colleen Hoover's rise to fame. Over the last few years, many of her novels have topped bestseller lists, not just because they're decent page-turners, but because she's cultivated a huge online fandom. Many of her stories deal with dark themes like emotional and physical abuse, which in itself doesn't have to be an issue, provided the story handles these topics responsibly. The problem, according to critics, is that some of her books actually gloss over or even romanticize abusive behavior. It Ends With Us, for example, centers on a protagonist who falls for a guy named Ryle. At first, he seems charming, and readers are drawn into their intense dynamic. Then, the story reveals just how volatile he can be. By the end, it's apparent that the relationship crosses serious boundaries. Some readers, especially those who have experienced similar abuse, say that Hoover's writing style makes the dangerous behaviors feel seductive rather than cautionary.
You mean to tell me that this whole time you guys are fawning over a book about domestic violence? They're trying to cancel It Ends With Us on Twitter because Colleen Hoover apparently romanticizes abuse. People are also sharing excerpts from the book that I cannot read this to you because I don't want to get banned. This person says, yes, it's romanticized. That's why some of us effing hate Colleen Hoover. Another person says, why the F are they making a film on this? On effing romanticization, abusive relationships, and domestic violence? Seriously? And this whole conversation of Colleen Hoover glorifying, romanticizing abuse has been a discussion topic for the longest time. It's even on her subreddit. People are like, do we think she's glorifying it? But a lot of readers have come to her defense saying that, no, that's not what the book is about at all. The book is about a woman who fell in love with an abuser, and the way it's written makes you fall in love with him too. And that was done on purpose, to get you into the mind of an abuse victim. And what a lot of people don't realize is that Colleen Hoover herself says that her dad was abusive toward her mom. And that inspiration trickled into It Ends With Us.
These complaints boiled over when Hoover introduced a tie-in that seemed completely out of touch with the content of the novel. She announced an It Ends With Us coloring book. Because the novel deals heavily with domestic violence, many felt that a coloring book was the last way to commemorate that story. It came across as tone-deaf and trivializing serious trauma for the sake of cute merchandise. Hoover's publishers planned to highlight memorable scenes and quotes for readers to color in, but critics asked exactly what images they thought fans would want to color: physical altercations, emotional manipulation, or pages showing the aftermath of violence. Hoover eventually apologized, admitting it was a misguided idea. She said she asked her publisher not to move forward. Still, the backlash was fierce, with survivors of domestic violence pointing out how hurtful it felt to see such painful subject matter boiled down into an arts and crafts activity.
Coloring book that is being published based on Colleen Hoover's It Ends With Us, a book that is about domestic You guys know that I hated this book. It was one of the worst things that I read in 2022. And every time that I talk about it, I emphasize the fact that it is not a romance. Despite how it is being marketed and despite how the story is framed, this is not a romance. We see that this is coming from those two areas, both the publisher and the author pushing it as a romance, talking about it as a romance. So people will say, well, I knew that. And also that by the end, you get the message that domestic violence is bad. But that doesn't take away from the lens through which we see the beginning of this story. And that is one that is highly, highly romanticized. No amount of tacking on happily ever after onto this with some other guy makes this story a romance, because the core relationship that we are exploring is between a woman and her abuser. Why it's so obvious to me that this is romanticized is the way that people talk about this, like her fandom out, in comments, adding on a coloring book in which we are told that it was going to highlight memorable scenes and quotes in a book where the main male lead bloodies his significant other. I mean, that's just more proof. Colleen Hoover romanticizes abuse.
Alongside that, there is also ongoing drama involving Hollywood stars Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, and actor-producer Justin Baldoni, who originally bought the film rights to It Ends With Us. The story goes that Baldoni intended to produce and possibly star in the adaptation. At some point, though, Blake Lively came on board, and tensions started to build behind the scenes. There's talk of a legal dispute in which Lively and possibly Ryan Reynolds want to buy out Baldoni's share. Even more shocking are accusations that Lively filed some sort of harassment lawsuit against Baldoni, although the details remain murky. Hoover initially seemed excited about Baldoni's involvement, even suggesting in an email that he should consider playing the role of Ryle. But in a later event, she implied that he was the one who first raised the idea. These contradictory statements led people to accuse her of switching allegiances to favor Lively and Reynolds, who apparently have the clout to push Baldoni out if certain contractual conditions are met.
So I just found this clip of something Colleen Hoover said about Justin Baldoni at Book Bonanza.
When Justin said he wanted to play Ryle, I was on board for that. I thought that he, kind of was what I envisioned when I wrote the book.
But if you have looked at Justin Baldoni's lawsuit and timeline, then you would know that Colleen Hoover was the one who suggested he play Ryle. Justin Baldoni provided several emails sent between him and Colleen Hoover ahead of turning It Ends With Us into a movie. Justin reached out to Colleen Hoover with the idea of optioning the book into a movie under his production company Wayfarer Studios. And he never mentioned acting in the film until Colleen suggested it, which she did right here on April 12th, 2019. She sent in an email, "Have you given any thought to whether you would want an acting role in this? Say maybe Ryle? I could see it." But that's not what she said at Book Bonanza. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with the allegations made against Justin Baldoni, but it's just interesting to see that she made this comment at Book Bonanza, because as a reminder, Book Bonanza happened in the midst of Blake Lively allegedly taking over the film, and Justin Baldoni was not allowed to go to Book Bonanza. Instead, Blake Lively, Brandon Sklenar, and Colleen Hoover went, and Blake, quote-unquote, snuck the movie in to show fans without Sony's approval because it wasn't done being edited. During the event, Colleen was talking about casting Justin as Ryle and said that he was the one who suggested it, which I almost feel like is just setting up the distance between Justin Baldoni and the rest of the cast from that point, before any allegations were publicly made and before they even appeared separately for PR, when speculations started forming about what happened between the cast.
Now, here's where it gets complicated. Some fans have pointed out that there might be a morality clause in the contract that allows Hoover to regain control of the adaptation rights if the original owner, Baldoni, faces damaging allegations. If that's true, then the current controversy could be more than a coincidence. The rumor mill suggests there's a strategy at play, with Lively and Reynolds hoping to capitalize on that clause to wrest control away from Baldoni and produce the film themselves. None of this has been confirmed by official sources, but the timeline and certain leaked emails make a lot of fans suspect something bigger is happening behind closed doors. Hoover's been quieter than usual on social media, fueling even more speculation.
Okay, so things are looking pretty bad for Colleen Hoover right now. Over the last 24 hours, we're getting like a little bit of insight as to why she just ghosted on social media. It's not as innocent as she just didn't want to be involved in the drama. This is a post on Reddit, but it makes a lot of sense. Here's the tea, allegedly. We all know that Justin bought the rights to Hoover's books about 5 years ago. And we all know that she just did a Houdini on social media after she backstabbed Justin, her #1 fan who wanted to put her story on film, by immediately backing Blake Lively. This is where it gets fucking fishy. Apparently, there's a morality clause in the contract which states that Hoover would have the option to obtain the book rights back and then resell if, wait for it, the current owner would be accused of something as heinous as sexual harassment. These months, everybody has been talking about Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds wanting to rip the rights from Justin so that they could produce and direct the next sequel. Justin did not accept any of the offers to sell, and there ultimately was no other choice to take the IP from him at this point. Then we know what happens next. And I just learned this, but apparently this wasn't a secret. This article on IMDb is from October of last year, and it says Ryan Reynolds reportedly wants to buy out Justin Baldoni from It Ends With Us at any cost. And going back in time a little bit more to August of last year, another content creator found this interview.
Well, you can have a what? A sequence, like it starts with us. I mean, if Colleen has her rights, I'll go anywhere. I'll follow this woman anywhere. Y'all heard her.
At that point in time, Justin still had the rights. He was not going to sell the rights at all for any reason. Why would they be talking about Colleen Hoover getting the rights?
Amid all of this, another controversy emerged when a Twitter user came forward alleging that Colleen Hoover's adult son made an inappropriate request for explicit photos, knowing the other person was a minor. The user claimed she told Hoover about it and was met with silence, or that Hoover blocked her. Hoover fired back in a private Facebook group, clarifying that while her son did say something he shouldn't have said, the allegations of it being a sexual assault situation were inaccurate. Nevertheless, the situation left many people unsettled. They questioned why Hoover seemed to brush off or minimize the claim, especially when her work so frequently tackles serious content like abuse and assault. Some see this as one more example of her inconsistent stance on issues that revolve around real harm.
Colleen Hoover, the author of It Ends With Us, has made a post on Facebook clearing up some rumors, including the fact that she's retiring. Because most of you have been with me during my entire 14-year publishing journey, I owe you some promises for our future together. I promise that I can sleep at night with a peaceful heart. I promise I'm okay. I promise I'm happy. I promise my 2-person staff of over 10 years still works for me. They would fire me before I fired them. I promise I'm just rotting at home doing my favorite things, watching Bravo with a Diet Pepsi at my side and melted chocolate somewhere in my bra. I promise I will continue to try and be present in here as much as possible, but I honestly don't have social media on my phone at all anymore, and I promise it's bliss. So kindly don't come back and read this promise too many times. I promise that as long as I still have readers who want to read what I write and readers who want to see film adaptations, and if I have fingers that can type, I will still be trying. Maybe at the speed of a turtle, but I will still be trying. I promise to host more giveaways, and I promise to close them out in a timely manner. I promise people care more about the number of clicks on their videos than the mental health of the people they are making videos about. I promise that your kind messages are helping, and I promise I also have the familial support system everyone on this earth deserves to have. And finally, I promise to myself that I will let them.
As for the rumors about Hoover's retirement, that turned out to be false. She explained in another Facebook post that she was simply taking a hiatus from social media for her mental health. She mentioned that she wanted to keep writing as long as she had fans who wanted to read her books, and that she intends to oversee film adaptations that do her stories justice. She also claimed she was happier without having social media on her phone and didn't appreciate how some content creators discuss her personal life for clicks rather than out of genuine concern. That statement raised eyebrows because a lot of her critics argue that discussing these issues publicly is important if they affect how young and impressionable readers interpret themes like abuse and consent. The question remains, is Hoover's work genuinely shining a light on domestic violence, showing readers how easily someone can get trapped in an unhealthy relationship? Or is it glamorizing harmful behavior for entertainment? Fans insist she's simply depicting the reality that love and cruelty can coexist, while critics see a troubling pattern in how these narratives unfold. Combine that with questionable merchandise decisions, shifting alliances in Hollywood lawsuits, and her son's alleged behavior, and you've got a recipe for intense public scrutiny. Many of Hoover's defenders say she's being unfairly targeted because her books occupy a space between romance and gritty realism, a place where tough subjects are often explored in detail. Yet even some loyal fans admit they were turned off by the coloring book debacle, calling it a complete misstep that was never going to land well. On the other side, there are readers who have either experienced domestic violence themselves or worked with survivors, and they feel deeply upset by how this content seems to be marketed. So, what's next for Colleen Hoover? With the film adaptation in limbo, it's unclear if the final version will honor the story in a sensitive way. There's also the possibility that this controversy will die down and her next novel release will overshadow it. But for now, the conversation continues. Some say her personal brand has been tarnished. Others argue that big-time controversies often happen to top-selling authors and will quickly fade. However, the stakes feel higher when we're dealing with stories about abuse, especially ones that reach wide audiences of teens and young adults who might not yet have the tools to recognize red flags in their own relationships. In the end, it all comes down to whether you believe Colleen Hoover's intentions are good, and whether intention even matters if the execution is harmful. If you're curious, there's no shortage of readers laying out meticulous critiques of her work, and of course, there are just as many vlogs praising her emotional storytelling. I recommend checking out different perspectives before deciding for yourself. Make no mistake, this isn't just a case of fans versus haters. The conversation around Hoover and her handling of difficult content cuts straight to the heart of how abuse should be portrayed in popular fiction. Let me know where you stand on this. Do you think she's bringing important issues to light, or do you feel she's playing fast and loose with traumatic topics? If you've read her books or followed the Hollywood saga, share your thoughts in the comments. I look forward to discussing it with all of you. Now, thanks for tuning in, and until next time, stay mindful of what you read and remember that real people's experiences should never be reduced to mere drama or entertainment.